Joining me now in studio is Michael Fanone, former D.C. Metropolitan Police officer, Courage for America council member, and author of Hold the Line, The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul.
When I first learned about the indictment, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine, Ryan Riley, and I told him how proud I felt to be an American at that moment, much in the way that I did when I learned that our military had killed Osama bin Laden. I just felt incredibly proud.
These two seem comparable to you?
Incredibly proud to have been.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but why that comparison in particular?
I believe they're comparable.
In what way?
Absolutely. Osama bin Laden was a terrorist who committed a horrific act against American people and against our republic. And I believe that Donald Trump is a terrorist who committed horrific acts against the American people.
Officer Fanone, I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today. Please tell me your thoughts on this third anniversary.
We are still in the midst of the same fight that began on January 6th, 2021. And we have a lot at stake in this country. And I think that it deserves every American's attention.
Back in 2021, you were the lawmaker who circulated the legal brief known as the Texas Amicus Brief, challenging the 2020 election outcome in a number of states, which by CBS editorial standards makes you an election denier.
That's nonsense.
Well, can I get you on the record on that?
I've always been consistent on the record. Did you read the brief? Did you get a chance to read what we filed with the Supreme Court?
Well, I have read extensively some criticisms of that.
You read commentary about the brief, but not what we submitted to the court.
But you recognize that President Biden won the 2020 election. Can you just put that aside as an issue?
President Biden was certified as the winner of the election. He took the oath of office. He's been the president for 3 years. The argument that we presented to the court, which is our only avenue to do so, was that the Constitution was clearly violated in the 2020 election. It's Article 2, Section 1, and anyone can Google it and read it for themselves. The system by which you choose electors to elect the president of the United States must be done by the individual states, and the system must be ratified by the state legislatures. That is language, plain language out of the Constitution.
So you still have issues with the validity of the 2020 election?
The Constitution was violated in the run-up to the 2020 election. Not always in bad faith, but in the aftermath of COVID, many states changed their election laws in ways that violated that plain language. That's just a fact. We presented that argument and those facts to the court, and it was never directly addressed because of the Texas litigation. But that was the only vehicle we had to present that issue squarely to the court.
The thing that really disturbs me is the unrelenting campaign from the right and from some conservative activists to slander, discredit, and ultimately, I guess, somebody used the phrase, we've claimed a scalp, I think, on social media, to essentially unseat gay and other presidents as well, when they don't like, not just the handling of the horrific attacks on Israel on October 7th, the way that was handled on campus, but really anything else that they don't like about not just these presidents, but actually what they would call wokeism on campus. So this is really an attack on academic freedom. It's an attack on people who are pluralists and believe that you should bring people from all over the world together of diverse backgrounds, and that you actually have more scholarly rigor and more value can be brought by having people from different backgrounds. This is an attack on diversity. This is an attack on multiculturalism. and on many of the values that a lot of us hold dear. And in fact, anybody really who is around my age in their 30s who went to any major public university or private university in this country, you know, these are values that are very important. And I think that's why these presidents are under attack. That's why Claudine Gay was under attack. The fact that she's a black woman and the first person who is a black American to lead Harvard only added to their thirst to dethrone her.
Administration has been concerned about what this will mean for our politics on the campaign trail, the use of deep fakes or misleading voters. What are the companies doing to prevent that?
You know, the social media companies are telling me that they're throwing every resource that they have to stop misinformation and disinformation. But the reality is that this is a sprawling, endless game of whack-a-mole. Bad information spreads constantly online, and it is continuing to be very hard to stop, especially with the arguments and protections of free speech. Now, Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, says it removes manipulated media and voter interference misinformation, and the company does utilize fact-checking organizations and beyond. But the reality here is that taking down all of this bad information has always been an impossible task on platforms of that size. And of course, we cannot forget about X, formerly Twitter. Elon Musk and his team have basically allowed the return of conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, and they've also dramatically reduced the size of their trust and safety team.
The one phrase you left out in your summation in the election interfering, voter suppressing, Democrat-backed and Biden-led 14th Amendment abusing decision, blah, blah, blah. I focus on that because that is untrue. These challenges are being brought by Republicans in those states, challenging Trump's ability to be on the Republican primary ballot. This has nothing to do with Democrats. Democrats are surely cheering what's happening, but they're not the driving force behind this.
The Colorado lawsuit was supported by a leftist organization called Crew. Now, Crew has been supported by, well, listen to their founder.
Who are some of the biggest donors you have, and is there a restriction on how much money they can give you?
We don't have any restriction, but I would say our biggest donors are, for example, the Open Society Institute is a very big donor.
And whose organization is that?
Well, it's a foundation, but it's well known to be George Soros is the one who funds it.
Again, I am so mindful, and I said this in my decision, that it is unprecedented. No Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But no presidential candidate has ever engaged in insurrection and been disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
We call it the wrap-up smear. If you want to talk politics, you call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic.
Do you condemn white supremacy and white nationalism?
I mean, who are you with? It's Washington Post. All right, so potato, okay. Of course, I condemn any form of vicious racial discrimination in this country. But I think that the presumption of your question is fundamentally based on a falsehood that really is the main form of racial discrimination we see in this country today. Institutionalized racism is institutionalized racial discrimination that we see that doesn't come from somehow discriminating against people on the basis of some tenet of white supremacy. It's based on affirmative action. It's based on actually discriminating against people on the color of their skin in a way that's actually institutionalized today. Was there a point in our history, at points in our prior national history, where there have been vicious forms of anti-black or anti-brown discrimination throughout this country after the Civil War and otherwise? Yes. But you're looking in the rearview mirror and using that to pose a question today that is so far removed from what the reality is in America today. This myth of white supremacy, the closest you can find is Jussie Smollett, where you all were actually, speaking of trust in the media, jumping up and down over some false narrative. The best way you're able to find your best instance of white supremacy was a guy who was actually paying his other fellow people to be actually staging something that didn't happen.
In recent weeks, you've put a lot of ideas out there. You've suggested on the campaign trail that January 6th was an inside job.
If you had told me, it's close to 3 years ago that January 6, 2021 happened. If you had told me 3 years ago, back when I was a biotech CEO, not steeped in this world, I was just consuming passive media but was focused on my world of developing medicines. If you had told me that January 6 was in any way an inside job, the subject of government entrapment, I would have told you that was crazy talk. Fringe conspiracy theory nonsense. I can tell you now, having gone somewhat deep in this, it's not. I mean, the reality is this. We do have a government, first of all, we have to acknowledge, that has lied to us systematically over the last several years about the origin of COVID-19, about the Hunter Biden laptop that we were told was false by 51 CIA experts and otherwise before we now know that it was true. You can go straight down the list, the Trump-Russia disinformation collusion hoax, all of it. Now we come to January 6th. The reality is we know that there were federal law enforcement agents in that field. We don't know how many. I think it's shameful. If I may finish just answering.
Well, let me
this
just.
is really important.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here because
I know the establishment doesn't approve of this message. I know
that there were federal
agents. We should be able to talk about this.
You're saying that there were federal agents.
This is important to talk about.
You are saying there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
Yep.
There is no evidence that there were federal agents in the crowd on January 6th.
So why, before Congress, when pressed on what the number was, they didn't say there were none? They just couldn't say how many there were.
So you're saying that that you have not seen any evidence that there were.
We've seen multiple informants suggesting that there were. We know people were FBI informants who were asked to do this.
Is there any evidence?
May I just finish this and you can come back and question me?
Well, let me clarify.
I know it's very uncomfortable for you.
I'm going to clarify my question.
I know this is an uncomfortable issue for many people, but we have to do the truth here.
I'm going to clarify my question because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm asking.
I understand this deeply. And I told you, I was with you 3 years ago. I'm not there now.
Where is the evidence?
Yes.
Where is the evidence that the government had a plot, an inside job,
but no, I'm going to tell you what an inside job is because I'm not
violence on January 6th?
I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth. I'm going to put my words in my mouth. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that.
Where is the evidence that the government was involved in planning or executing January 6th?
So I'm going to give you hard facts. And if I may, Abby, I know this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but we're going to go through this and you can push back on it after that. And you can push back on that. And let's do this fairly. Why did they suppress footage of now what's been released, 200 hours of footage of shooting rubber bullets into that crowd, shooting tear gas into that crowd? You didn't see that before. You saw what the response was to that. Now you see footage coming out of actually rolling out the red carpet for Capitol Police allowing people in.
Again,
right through the front door.
The vast majority of the footage.
Video evidence should have been released before, Abby.
Mr. Ramaswamy, the vast majority of the footage shows police officers being overrun
and I want to talk about one more
by
case.
violent
this is really important.
riders. That's
I'm going to give you some hard facts.
Of it shows.
So here's what entrapment is.
Cherry pick.
I'm not cherry picking. If I may finish, Abby. If I may finish, Abby. I'm not cherry picking.
Examples.
To the contrary. To the contrary.
You know who cherry picked? You know who cherry picked?
The government.
That is what happened.
The government cherry picked 12 hours of footage when there was 200 hours of footage. So cherry picking was the government, not me.
That the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer was a job of inside entrapment.
I think there's a civil libertarian issue of our time. Gretchen Whitmer's kidnapping. I want to be really clear on this because it's the same issue in the same FBI, same even part of the FBI. 3 people who were in an alleged plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer were acquitted at the end of trial because it was entrapment. That is, government agents put them up to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done. They gave them credit cards with spending limits of up to $5,000, encouraged them to buy munitions, plan something they weren't otherwise willing to plan. So much so, and I want people at home to know this, especially CNN viewers to know this, is that one of the jurors went to those defendants and apologized afterwards, gave him a hug, apologized, seeing what the government had put a poor guy up to who had to go to some Mexican restaurant across the street to get hot water. These people were exploited with credit cards up to $5,000, FBI agents putting them up to a kidnapping plot that we were told was true but was entrapment. Same thing with the Capitol Police, people letting them in freely. Many of those people then being charged.
Look,
the government cannot put you up to do something and then charge you for it. That's wrong.
I don't want to have
to the left or the right.
I don't want to have to interrupt you. I really don't. but I don't want you to mislead the audience here or at home.
That the House Republicans, let me finish, that the House Republicans impeachment inquiry is part of a Democratic plot to sideline Biden, that there is a devious Democratic scheme to actually nominate Nikki Haley. The reality is none of these are top issues for Iowa voters. So why are you focused on these conspiracy theories?
Well, focused is a heavy-handed word, Dasha. If you take 80% of what I said, I'm talking about policy and future direction of the country, talking about how we'll increase the supply of energy to bring down the cost for everyday Americans. And so that's 80% of what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to hide from what I do believe are realities hiding in plain sight that people deserve to know about, which the last item that you described. It's not a secret that Larry Fink is going to fundraisers of Nikki Haley, propping her up. That actually one of the biggest funders of the lawsuits against Trump, including efforts to keep him off the ballot, is Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. That's a $250,000 donor to super PAC supporting Nikki Haley. And so I reject this mainstream media general narrative of dismissing something as a conspiracy theory, when in fact I'm a big fan of going after facts hiding in plain sight.
But you know that when you say these things, you know when you bring up the Gretchen Whitmer thing, you know when you bring up January 6th,
grounded in fact.
January 6th being an inside job. Yes, 80% of what you talk about might be policy, but when you hit those issues, that's going to take over the news cycle. You know how it works.
I don't think it should. I'm speaking the truth,
but
as it does
you're a smart guy. You know how it works. Are you using that to get attention as you've been slumping in the polls?
To the contrary, I'm actually speaking. You have a lot of political analysts that look at this and say exactly what you're saying. Why aren't you just saying what causes you to poll better? It's what every other political candidate's doing. They're taking what their consultants serve them up. Here's what the voters say are the top issues. Spout back to them what the voters want to hear.
So why?
I'm sharing my true convictions. And I think if we want to revive our constitutional republic, we deserve a government that tells the people the truth again. Not just when it's easy, but when it is hard. Our government has systematically lied to us on things that really matter. Of the origin of COVID-19. We were told for years that it didn't come from a lab in China, when it absolutely did. In fact, you were suppressed on social media for saying it. The eve of the last election, I think it's shameful that the Hunter Biden laptop story was systematically suppressed so voters didn't have that information.
But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about Gretchen Whitmer being an inside job of entrapment.
I'm talking about a government that has lied to its people. The same FBI that's investigating conservatives, the same FBI and the same law enforcement apparatus, Jack Smith, that has subpoenaed millions of Americans for anybody who liked or retweeted a Donald Trump post in 2020. That's Orwellian, but that's the same federal law enforcement apparatus that put people up to an alleged kidnapping plot that they otherwise wouldn't have been put up to. Multiple defendants acquitted on grounds of entrapment. And so is this a top issue that voters bring up on the mind of voters? Absolutely it's not. But if the mainstream media is pushing, and the establishment in both parties is pushing one established narrative.
So if it's not a priority for voters, why are you so focused on it?
Because truth is a priority for me. That's the answer. Truth is the priority for this campaign. And I don't need to be speaking to what every other professional politician is spouting off. We need to speak the hard truths that other candidates are unwilling to touch. And even though that doesn't poll necessarily on what NBC or the Des Moines Register or another media outlet is going to ask voters what are the top issues on their mind. It's important. What really is important to many voters, I believe, is a government that trusts them with the hard truth again. That hasn't happened for a very long time. And so my view is if that's what the voters want, that's what they're going to get from me. If they want somebody who's going to incrementally reform things, change tax rates by 1% one direction or another, and call that a legislative accomplishment, go with somebody else. That's not me. But if you want a candidate who is actually going to revive the ideals of 1776, who is going to trust the people transparently with what the government knows to be true, if you want a government that actually is of and for and by the people again, I think I'm the sole candidate in this race who can deliver that. And that choice is up to the voters, but I believe that's what the voters will want. If not, I won't be the president.
And I just sit there thinking, Charlie, is this what pro-democracy newspapers in Bavaria were writing in 1932, 1933, going, if Adolf Hitler gets to power, it's really us pro-democracy newspapers who are to blame for warning people just how dangerous this Hitler character may be?
Yeah, I'm sure that Hitler derangement syndrome was a big deal back in 1932. I mean, this is now, it is interesting that you goes on the air and says, on Meet the Press, and says, refuses to say she will certify the election, number one, and actually defends Donald Trump's use of the term that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country, that Hitlerian rhetoric.
I mean, can you call them Republicans?
I don't know what you call them, actually, when they're quoting Hitler and they're channeling Hitler.
He hasn't read anything other than this kind of Hitler theory of the big lie, throw it out there, blame it on somebody, in Hitler's case, the Jews.
Cowards who might as well go back and read pro-democracy newspapers apologizing for Adolf Hitler in the early 1930s. These cowards are a part of this as well now, where they're saying if you speak out against the tyranny of Donald Trump and what he promises to bring on America, then you are causing the rise of Donald Trump.
In the following days, Sandy, not her real name, joined a massive citizen effort to identify the individuals who broke into the Capitol. She's been directly responsible for helping to put people behind bars, and she now has to hide her identity for fear of retaliation.
One of the more insidious ones would be a J6er who is yet to be arrested. He started sending me videos of him racking his gun.
Sandy is today part of an informal community of dozens of ordinary Americans who came to be known as sedition hunters. Over time, they developed their own methodologies, guidelines, even a software application to keep track of every individual rioter, giving each one a pseudonym and compiling dossiers of evidence that they then turned over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, along with the rioters' real identity.
And I love your ears.